Welcome to the 2021 Bend Film Festival. I'm your host for this Q&A of Almost an Island with Jonathan Van Ballenberg. Just such a wonderful documentary, just exhibiting, um, a dying culture and focused on a great subject with Elmer and his family and so forth. And we just have a lot of questions we want to kind of dig into and pick your brain in this whole process and how it was made and such. But maybe you could tell a little bit about yourself first. Your background, how you got involved in filmmaking, and all the way up to this point.
Okay, well, thanks for having me, first of all, and for having Almost an Island at the festival. About me, just real quick, really, I grew up, and this is relevant to the film, I grew up in Juneau, Alaska, which is at the very bottom of the state. The Kotzebue, which the film focuses on, is at almost the top of the state, above the Arctic. I grew up loving doing outdoor things like fishing, hiking, hunting. My father, who I did not grow up with, was a wildlife biologist who studied moose for 35 years. And so I had a lot of experiences that were most formative, I'd say, being outside, and also relevant to the film and just where I come from. I'm not native, but when I was growing up, I would say about 75% of my friends were, just based on demographics in Juneau, Alaska. My friends, now that I think about it, they didn't talk much about being native. Some of them were adopted, and they didn't share with me what it was like to, quote, be native. I think we were just kids growing up, and they didn't, I would say, naturally think about it unless someone asked. Now, those were my friends. There are very traditional households, and that would be different, where they definitely did think about what it was like and talk about it and share. But I would say we were just kids growing up and loving fishing and doing all that stuff. Uh, Fast forward to about 1999, I came to Tucson, Arizona for graduate school in creative writing. While I was in graduate school, I had a work study job for a poetry focused library that would have a guest lecture series and reading series. And they needed someone to learn how to use this camera and record the readings. And so I volunteered to do that. And I quickly found myself not writing and borrowing that camera on the weekends, and just loving the process of capturing visuals and seeing the world through the viewfinder. It's just a really, I've seen a lot of other people just get smitten by it, and you seem to want to film and film and film. And then after a while, you start thinking, okay, well, that's one part of filmmaking. How then do I use this footage? And I started making, short things just for fun. I was a teacher at the time. After graduate school, I taught middle school and high school English, and the death knell of that career was when the principal asked me if I would have a documentary film elective for the kids to participate in, which was really just, for me, it was something for me to participate in as well. And once I had that experience of actually making, a short documentary, I knew I had to do that. And I'm not very proud of it, but I quit mid-semester and started, buying more video equipment and getting jobs. And I make my living not through my documentaries, but through my commercial and corporate work. My wife and I have a small business we run out of our house, and I film for universities and businesses and things like that. So that's about me, and that's how I got into filmmaking.
Well, I mean, if I may be so bold to say, I certainly would agree that you made the right choice when
Thank you.
shifting to this side of the craft, and it certainly shows. I mean, almost an island. It just really does a great job into delving into all aspects of this man and the culture. There's great cinematography. There's uh, a great depth, as I said, into impact culture, and
Thank you.
you really covered the whole gamut. I mean, there really isn't one stone left unturned, and I want to ask you, what I know you're from Alaska
Right.
originally, but what was sort of the catalyst of you wanting to make this specific documentary?
Okay. A couple of things. I have a hard time talking about it only because I hear myself, this preacher kind of, I don't, where I want to share my views, and it feels to me like I'm preaching, but we tend to do that when we care about things. One of the things I felt when I was growing up is I couldn't believe that, even as a kid, I couldn't believe that here we were in Alaska, huge state with many tribal entities in it, many. There's I, you know, each one is different, of course, but they are united in some degree in terms of maybe how they were treated throughout history, the state they find themselves in. But I couldn't believe that here I was at school, but we weren't learning about the history and the present culture of the people that had been there the longest. And it always seemed to me morally wrong. I mean, a couple times when I was maybe in fifth, sixth grade, we would have a native person come in as a like guest speaker. And those were always my favorite. That's what I remember from the early education. I remember learning about, you know, their traditions. They were heartfelt. It'd be one person sharing stories, how they learned to do the things they love, whether it was tanning fish leather or harvesting caribou. Those were the parts of my education that really resonated with me. So it's still, I think, that way, where there's not enough education just in the larger mainstream culture about the local um, people. Nowadays, I do see there's some trends that have started. Here in Tucson, if I log into something like a reading or an event online, I'll often see like someone at the university say, here we are, we're recognizing that we're on traditional Tohono O'odham land, and I think that's great. And I see that movement has started, about this recognition. But as a filmmaker, I I make films about what resonates with me, what I'm drawn to, just on a real visceral level. So my favorite place in the world is Alaska. I care about conservation. I care about healthy ecosystems. I love hunting. I love fishing. And I care about learning from the people who have been most familiar with that ecosystem for the longest period in time, and that's the first Alaskans, as they're called. I was working on a project where I was the filmmaker who was hired by the University of Alaska in Fairbanks branch to make a full dome, meaning a 360 planetarium show, not about the stars, but it was using live video that was projected in 360 all around the planetarium. And the point of the project was to tell the perspective of the Arctic Alaska natives, meaning the Alaska natives who live in the Arctic, mainly the Inupiat people, plural, and to tell the story of the Northern Lights through their cultural context. So I went with the University of Alaska Fairbanks to several places. We went to Nome, we went to Kotzebue, we went to Fairbanks, and we went to what used to be called Barrow, and it's now called, I think, if I'm pronouncing it right, Utqiagvik. And we interviewed tribal elders. I had no part at all in forming the questions. I was just there working the 360 camera.
Right.
But one of the elders that they had arranged to speak to us was Elmer Goodwin. And I just, I always want to make films based on hearing someone talk. Like, you find people who have a way of speaking that just arrests you. And when Elmer was asked questions about the Northern Lights and about his upbringing there in Kotzebue, I just liked the cadence of his voice, how he told stories, how he paced it, his body language. And he and I, just sat around a table one night talking about knives. So, and I make knives it's kind of it's a passion for me that's as big as filmmaking. I love knives, I love knife making. So I just happened to ask him what kind of knives he used up there. And we hit it off on that level of like tools you use out in the field while having adventures. And we just decided to keep in touch. Well, I got back home to Tucson, Arizona, where I had been thinking about him for several weeks. I emailed him and I said, the stories you told me are really in my mind and I just can't stop thinking about them. Would you consider making a documentary, and embarking on this? And he said, I got an email back a couple days later saying he shared my email with his family and they all are okay with it. So why don't I come up there? And it's an intense thing to go to a place where you've only met someone kind of on this, you don't know them well at all. And then you decide to live with them. So I just spent 2 weeks with him.
Yeah.
And the day after getting off the plane, we went to his camp, meaning his cabin that's takes about an hour to get to from the village of Kotzebue by boat, his boat.
Uh-huh.
And there we were, just the two of us. And I'll give the questions back over to you, but just if I could keep riffing on that for a second.
Yeah, no worries.
It was important to me. I didn't want to. Okay, I'll back up a couple steps. A lot of films about Native people who are made by non-Native people, I would say most films made about Native people, the director shows up with an idea of the story and they get what they want to create that story. It's like every question is like a hoop and the people in the film jump through that hoop, not because of anything they do, but because the questions are so loaded and the questions are more like statements. And I'll get, for example, why is hunting the most important thing in your culture? And so that's saying as a question, hunting is the most important thing in your culture, and make that fit as an answer. And so I knew I didn't want to show up asking questions like that. And I have to say that one of my favorite things in life and my way of interacting with people is I just naturally enjoy asking people questions. That's how I would rather ask a question and listen than share my own, thoughts. That's just how I interact with my friends even. So when I was there with time, lots of time for 2 weeks, 24 hours of daylight with Elmer in his cabin, lots of time. I didn't want to force the sharing, meaning I didn't want to set it up so rigidly how he would share his information, his personality, his life with me. So we would wake up and at the breakfast table, he would often say, well, what do you want to do today? Meaning, what's the plan? So he was open to me. Like, I mean, here I was with
Oh,
all my equipment, and
uh,
he was expecting that I would show up with these questions, saying, well, I know salmon are out there. Can we go and catch some, and then I'll film you smoking them and talking about it? Like, he was kind of expecting things like that. But I didn't want to force it that way. And so I would say, well, when he asked me, what do you want to do today? I would kind of say, well, I don't know. And I have to say that made me feel like an idiot, because it presented me, the filmmaker, as not having any plan. But I really wanted him to say, well, and this is what would happen. Well, why don't I take you on a little boat ride and show you where I had my first camp, meaning where he first had his subsistence experience as a young man. And so we do that. So I would always be stubborn, and I would never say, let's do this. Let's have you talk about this. And that, I don't think that could work with everyone, but Elmer has a gift for speaking. And so once he started talking, it would usually end with me saying, I'm out of battery. you
you're
know?
right. And
So
I know what you mean. And, documentary filmmaking is such a beast within itself. I mean, it's very, you don't necessarily want to force subject matter to, come at your whim, but more or less follow the natural order of things to get it as it's happening. And I think, you know, the way you presented it with Elmer and filming and everything really did come across that these things weren't in any way like staged or planned, or you know what I mean. It felt very natural,
good. Yeah.
and I think that's what really kept me captivated, kept your audience watching and watching, because everything sort of just flowed out like that, like it wasn't it was very organic is what I'm
Well,
getting at.
I'm I'm thrilled to hear that. It took it took 8 different trips up there to get enough material for it, because like that, for example, I mean, if you show up with a camera and a willing family, you need a variety of footage still. And so that first time I went up there for 2 weeks, it rained every single day, all day, except for one day. So the scenes where you see Elmer and his grandson Benji and Benji's friend Jaden all cutting fish out on the side of the river, and it's beautiful sunlight. You would think, oh, it's like that every day. And no, that was our one window to be outside that day. So I did a lot of, inside footage, and I got to know Elmer on that and on that trip. And he also ended up in the hospital for 5 or 6 days, just nothing major, intestinal issues. But what I'm trying to say is that kind of approach wouldn't work if you had like a big budget but limited time. So big budget, lots of pressure, but only 2 weeks to spend up there, and then whatever footage you have, you're done. I
Yeah.
had 5 years and 8 trips, and I lived with them for a whole summer once, and I fished. I mean, commercial fished with Aya Goodwin, Elmer's son. I was on the boat every day with him for 14 hours a day fishing. I had the camera in case anything happened, but in the whole summer of fishing like that, I would say I only filmed about 10 hours on the boat. But just in case, that's why I was up there on that boat, is just in case something happened in town. I wanted to be there. And you said that, in general, that's what people's strategy is. They want things to happen very naturally, organically. I don't think I think there's just as many people nowadays that do want to force the scenes and that set them up. And I do like some filmmakers that do that. I mean, Werner Herzog does that, and I like his documentaries. It's just not the kind that I wanted to make. That's all.
Great, man. You know, it kind of segues into, I mean, it's cold up there. There's just all different kinds of weather. Your footage shows some very icy tundric, shots. I really want to ask, and I know there was many. What were some of the biggest challenges of shooting this?
Yeah. Do you mean in terms of weather and geography?
Well, I mean, was there any particular day where it was like the roughest, or I mean, like enlighten me with
Okay, here's one. Well, I mean, when I finished this film, which was not too long ago, um, I have no desire to make another documentary right now because I am so depleted. And I know that will change, but right now it's like after running a marathon, you just want to collapse. I literally broke bones making the film. Here's one example. I showed up in the summer, that summer of fishing, actually, 2017. I got off the plane, and I immediately was asked by Elmer if I would help out with something. And I said, of course, sure. What can I do? Well, I want you to go down to the morgue and I want you to pick up my cousin's body. And
oh my God. This really happened?
I'm not making it up. And she had died of natural causes, and she was an older woman, and I had met her before, and yet I had never seen a body before, and that's something that is an intense experience. So here I was at the morgue, taking the body out in a cardboard box, and this is a morgue not anywhere. This is a morgue in a village in Alaska that was more than willing to let me put that cardboard box in the back of a pickup truck and drive off with it. There, you take a body and you dig a hole in the cemetery and you put it in there. I'm going to answer your question. Just, you got to trust me that I'm headed somewhere. So I showed up, we put the body, had some help, put the body in the truck, drove to the Quaker church, put the box with the body in the church, and then the task was to dig the grave. And I was asked if I would go in this shed and get a jackhammer out, because remember, it's Alaska, there's permafrost, the ground that never freezes, though it's melting under climate change. Anyway, you need a jackhammer to break into it. So I went into the shed and it was dark, and I was lifting a heavy jackhammer out of the corner, and I didn't know that there was another jackhammer leaning up against it. And that one fell down hard, and the thing weighs a good 100 pounds, and it fell right on my big toe. So here I am with this big plan of spending the whole summer there, and I was just really in agony. It felt like my toe was broken, but here I was with this responsibility of digging the grave, and now I was not the only one. People from the community gradually showed up. We were all doing it together. But more and more, I had trouble standing. And after about an hour, Elmer said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I don't think I am, actually. I think I need to go to the hospital." So one broken big toe took me out of this important moment of, you can't, in terms of being an outsider of a community and showing up and being involved, you can't, it doesn't get more, it doesn't get a better scenario than that. I don't mean to speak so clinically about it, but there you are with a shovel, with a jackhammer, working on a grave, not speaking, involved in an important ritual of caring for the dead. And I had to leave and go to the hospital and then walk around with a big boot, a therapeutic boot on my leg. And so that was one thing that was hard. It was also hard in the winter. Nowadays cameras, for the most part, if you're like me and you shoot, by yourself, one person crew, you don't, your camera is not one thing, meaning like a big body, it's like an erector set thing where you buy the body of the camera, then you get an attachment that a monitor, then an attachment for the audio that's a preamp, then you get an attachment amount a mic on it, and then you get an attachment for a shoulder or grip, and so the thing is very fragile. That was so hard to film with. Um, Sometimes I would be in a boat that was going very fast, being driven by someone else, and I was literally sliding on my back, trying to protect on the floor of the boat, trying to protect the camera from hitting the wall of the boat, or using a drone in the winter that's connected to your phone in terms of a monitor, and that Wi-Fi connection in seriously cold weather flakes out all the time, and you can't fly it with your gloves. And so I would be driving a snowmobile, and I'd come across a huge herd of caribou, and I would stop. The caribou would be running away. I would take off my gloves. I would get the drone all ready. By the time it was in the air, the caribou were gone. My fingers were so cold I couldn't feel them, and I would have to land the drone because the battery life was getting sucked out by the cold temperatures. Just little things like that. It wasn't about climbing mountains or braving starvation, nothing like that. It was more like these kind of small, more immediate things, like how to film if your foot has a
Yeah.
broken toe.
Well, it certainly pays. It certainly paid off. I mean, man, that you know, I couldn't imagine that. Just way to go on that one. I have to ask you. Um, what do you what are you planning on for the future? I mean, do you have anything else that you're working on at this time, or any other
Um,
future endeavors?
do you mind if I say one more thing besides before I get to that?
Yeah, sure,
Okay.
absolutely.
Just because it's okay. I think I'm thrilled by your questions. At the beginning, when you were introducing me in the film, you said I was up there, filming this dying culture,
Mhm.
and I just wanted to touch on that they certainly don't today. A lot of them don't feel like it's dying, and that they're very engaged in safeguarding it in a way that I feel very moved by in terms of their initiatives, their education programs with kids. They have workshops where they teach people who want to know how to do traditional sewing, things like that. Things like at the 4th of July in the film, you see these baby beauty contests where mothers will make parkas out in a traditional way, and then so there are many efforts to preserve it, but at the same time, I do think there's truth in what you said, so I'm not just trying to criticize it. This is a culture where subsistence living is so important to it, and if you have ecosystems that collapse because of climate change, so marine mammals die because of warming Arctic waters becoming more acidic, food diminishes for the seals to eat, for the salmon to eat. If you have caribou no longer migrating, how are you going to practice this subsistence tradition if the resources are not there? So I think that I wanted to show how they were, not only the ways that the traditions have thinned maybe since the time Elmer was a child. Things were very different, where
Right.
everyone in Kotzebue had a dog team, he said. Now that's not the case. So the tradition is, in a sense, slipping away.
Yeah.
But I think what the film has to offer is to show some of the passion behind the people who are trying to, not just trying, who are actively preserving, by
Right.
So thanks for letting me.
No. I mean,
Okay.
you bring up a good point because, I noticed in the film, you have the youth. I believe it's his one of his grandchildren goes to college
Phoenix.
in Arizona.
Yeah.
I'm a fellow Arizonian myself, so I recognize those city buses and such, and that whole, and which is a very bold jump for him to take. All the way
And
coming
he
from a
handled it
very
really well.
very ingrained culture, and then just being in a completely different world, and you could see it on his face, just the awe and the wonder, and him taking in his new environment. And the very surprising part about that was he came back, and he decided he wanted to stay.
Right.
Very cool, very interesting. His culture meant more to him for at that time. And so, I mean, I think that really everything you just said really resonates to that point,
Okay.
to where it's not, it's not a dying culture. It's a culture that's uh, being preserved, but in its
Yeah.
might be some struggle to it, just with the evolving times. But man, you do a really good job at just,
Thank you.
you went all the way
Sorry.
to Arizona and came back.
Um, yeah, that I thought his face is so expressive, and when he's walking down the streets of Phoenix, but also sitting on that crowded bus with these
Right.
party people,
Yeah.
just screaming. At one time you see him kind of flinch, like, "Gosh, these people are being really loud."
Yeah.
But to answer your question, what do I want to do in the future? I'm not sure. I would love to do something else with that has to do with native people. I've done a little here in Arizona with O'Atum and Yaqui, and I love that. I don't know. Right now, I'm a cinematographer for a couple documentaries, and I'm enjoying doing that. Like, show up, film what the director points you to, and that's pretty gratifying to me. That's my favorite part of making films, is the actual filming.
Well, I sincerely hope that you continue on with more work as such. And
Thank
again,
you.
I just want to say, I really enjoyed your film. I really loved it, and just all the
Thank
hard
you.
work that you put into it shows and shines brightly. And just so happy that it's a part of this year's lineup at the 2021 Bend Film Festival. Very, very well deserved. Well, I mean, I could be talking to you all day, but I think we got to wrap this up.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Jonathan, again. And for those of you, if you're only watching this Q&A and haven't seen Almost an Island yet, please go back and watch the entire thing. You'll be easily sucked into it from the very first couple minutes. Thank you again, Jonathan. And that is a wrap.
Thank you, Boise. Good to meet you.